Hello students, let's continue with the chapter What, Where, How and When of Social Science. Before moving ahead with the chapter, let's do a quick recap. We studied what can we know about the past. We can know about the lives of farmers to merchants to kings, from scientists to priests. We can know about the lives and where they lived, what kind of food they ate, what clothes they wore. We can also know about the children, which kind of games they played, what songs they sang, what plays they saw. Then we studied where did people live. First we studied that Narmada Valley was the region where people used to hunt and gather their foods. The Suleiman and Kirthar hills was the region where rearing animals and living in villages started. The Garo hills was the region where the early agriculture developed, and the Vindhya hills where rice was cultivated. Indus and its tributaries saw the first cities flourish. The Ganga Valley had cities about 2500 years ago, and Magad was the first big kingdom. Let's continue with the chapter. We studied where did people live. Now, why did they used to travel? In ancient times, people used to travel from one part of the subcontinent to another. Subcontinent means a region that is smaller than a continent, but it is very large and separated by seas, hills and mountains. The hills and high mountains, including the Himalayas, deserts, rivers and seas, made journeys dangerous at times but never impossible. So, men and women moved in search of livelihood as also to escape from natural disasters like floods or droughts. Sometimes men marched in armies conquering others' lands. Besides, merchants traveled with caravans or ships carrying valuable goods from place to place. And religious teachers walked from village to village, town to town, stopping to offer instruction and advice on the way. Finally, some people perhaps traveled driven by a spirit of adventure, wanting to discover new and exciting places. All these led to the sharing of ideas between people. Now, why do people travel nowadays? Hills, mountains and seas form the natural frontiers of the subcontinent. Frontier means natural line or border dividing two countries. While it was difficult to cross these frontiers, those who wanted could and did scale the mountains and cross the seas. People from across the frontiers also came into the subcontinent and settled here. These movements of people enriched our cultural traditions. People have shared new ways of carving stone, composing music, and even cooking food over several hundreds of years. Names of the land. How did a particular region got its name? Two of the words we often use for our country are India and Bharat. The word India comes from the Indus called Sindhu in Sanskrit. The Iranians and the Greeks who came through the northwest about 2500 years ago and were familiar with the Indus called it the Hindus or the Indos, and the land to the east of the river was called India. The name Bharat was used for a group of people who lived in the northwest and who are mentioned in the Rig Veda, the earliest composition in Sanskrit, dated to about 3500 years ago. Later, it was used for the country. Now, we already studied what we can find out about the past. But how can we find out about the past? Well, there are several ways of finding out about the past. One is to search for and read books that were written long ago. These are called manuscripts because they were written by hand. This comes from the Latin word manu, meaning hand. These were actually written on palm leaf or on the specially prepared bark of a tree known as the birch, which grows in the Himalayas. Over the years, many manuscripts were eaten away by insects, some were destroyed, but many have survived, often preserved in temples and monasteries. These books dealt with all kinds of subjects, religious beliefs and practices, the lives of kings, medicine and science. Besides, there were epics, poems, plays. Many of these were written in Sanskrit. Others were in Prakrit, language used by ordinary people, and Tamil. Here you can see the image of an ancient Indian manuscript. It is prepared from the bark of a tree of birch which grows in the Himalayas, and they were found in temples or monasteries. Monasteries are the buildings where monks or religious people live. We can also study inscriptions. These are writings on relatively hard surfaces such as stone or metal. Sometimes kings got their orders inscribed so that people could see, read and obey them. There are other kinds of inscriptions as well, where men and women, including kings and queens, recorded what they did. For example, kings often kept records of victories in battle. In Junagadh also, we have an inscription at Ashok Shila Lake. There were many other things that were made and used in the past. Those who study these objects are called archaeologists. They study the remains of buildings made of stone and brick, paintings and sculpture. They also explore and excavate, dig under the surface of the earth to find tools, weapons, pots, pans, ornaments and coins. Some of these objects may be made of stone, others of bone, baked clay or metal. Objects that are made of hard, imperishable substances usually survive for a long time. Archaeologists also look for bones of animals, birds and fish to find out what people ate in the past. Plant remains survive far more rarely. If seeds of grain or pieces of food have been burnt, they survive in a charred form. Historians, that is, scholars who study the past, often use the word source to refer to the information found from manuscripts, inscriptions, and archaeology. Once sources are found, learning about the past becomes an adventure as we reconstruct it bit by bit. So historians and archaeologists are like detectives who use all these sources like clues to find out about our pasts. Charred means burnt or blackened. That's it with today's class. Today also you do not have any written homework, but please go through the lesson again. It's easy to understand but gets difficult to remember. So it will be better for you if you keep on revising. If you have any doubts, feel free to ask.